Hey you guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin'. Today we're talking about the top baits for April bass fishing. April is probably the single best bass fishing month of the entire year if we're looking at the entire country. Depending on where you are in the country, your fish are probably in all three stages of the spawn, or at least they are going to be. There are some pre-spawners, there will be spawners, there will be post-spawners. Particularly as you get into the end of the month, you start seeing a few more of those post-spawn fish. But as a result of having fish in all those phases, there are all sorts of ways to catch them. I mean, truly, we could just open up the boat locker and say, throw all of those or throw any of those, because this is a time of year where truly you can go out with baits that you have confidence in. You can go out with baits that you want to learn and build confidence in. This is just a time of year where you tend to be able to get a lot of bites. Even with that said, we have some key baits that we know, day after day after day. These are the baits that will be on the deck, the baits actually that are on the deck, because we can trust them to consistently catch fish. One of the best things as we kick this off about April is I start really seeing a return of the option to slow down. February and March, we power fish a ton. Burning baits, covering water, because we're looking for those groups of fish, schools of pre-spawn bass, and when we find them, we can catch a ton of them in a hurry. That will continue through April, and we're going to talk about that. But April is really where you start seeing more and more of those fish hit the bank and spread out. And as a result, you can also start slowing down and fishing very effectively without wasting time. February, March, if you're just going down the bank, picking it apart, you're not being as effective as you are fast moving power fishing. So the very first bait is going to be a slow moving bait. In the month of April, if a guy just wants to get bit, it is very hard to beat a shaky head. The shaky head is one of those baits that it's weedless, number one, and you can throw it essentially anywhere. In the spring, bass push up on that bank. They get shallow. You have to remember that in most places, they did not winter up shallow. They've just returned to the shallows. As a result, they can be a little finicky about being up there. So you want to focus on a weedless bait, because if you're throwing up shallow and you get snagged and you have to take a boat in there, you can push all the fish out of those shallows because they're not used to being back in there. They're not used to boat traffic like they are by the time you get into summer. So focusing on a bait that's weedless, a shaky head, 6-inch worm is a fantastic way to catch those fish. Now, all of these things, we're going to link them in the video description. If you open the description below the video, if you're on tacticalbassin.com, you just scroll down. If you're on YouTube, you have to hit more, scroll down, hit more again. Facebook, it's down there as well. But we'll link all of this for you straight to Tackle Warehouse. The second technique is also going to be a slower, more methodical way of fishing, and that's the jig. Now, transitioning into the jig, the shaky head is awesome. You can catch a ton of fish, but for the guy who wants to focus on getting bigger bites, I have a completely separate tip for you, and that is to take your shaky head. Notice how similar these colors are, all in all. Very similar. You take your shaky head and you set it aside, even though that was bait number one, and you focus in on a smaller profiled finesse style jig. Weedless jig, small profile. I've got a pack a chunk on there. It's no mistake that that's green pumpkin blue in April. I love my slow moving baits, my bottom contact baits. I love to add blue flake to those things. I think it helps create that bluegill image, and it's a personal confidence thing all through April, May, really starting in March, to add that blue in there. I just think it works really well. But by throwing a finesse jig, you've got a downsized package, still super weedless, And when you cross paths with, 2-pounders up there on the bank, they're going to eat that jig just like they were going to eat that shaky head. But if you happen to cross paths with a 7-pounder, she is more likely to eat the jig than the shaky head, in my experience. In my time on the water, more of those big ones have committed to that jig in comparison. So if you still want to catch a lot of fish, but you don't want to limit your size, that finesse jig can be a great option. And then, of course, this is also the time of year for that full-size traditional jig. This is a 1/2-ounce pitching jig. If I could only have one jig to fish all the time, it would be a 1/2-ounce pitching jig, no question. We're going to match our color depending on what your watercolor is. So if you've got clear water, we're something like this guy. And of course, I'll link my favorite colors in the description. But if you've got that murkier stained water, black blue is a springtime staple, but I like to soften it up. This color is called hematoma. It's not a true black blue. I just have a ton of faith in that. And then, of course, I've got a 4-inch Paca craw on that, one of my favorite craw style baits. That combination is just a fish catcher. That's it for slow moving baits. Even in April, I'm going to focus most of my time on faster moving baits. The next one would be an A-rig. This is our micro rig that we launched back in winter. And then bigger than that, we have the mini flex. Bigger than that, we have the flex. But for the guy who's never gotten into A-rig fishing because it's hard to do, it's uncomfortable, you don't like slinging that giant thing, that's what the micro is all about. This thing hardly weighs more than a spinnerbait. You could throw it on a spinning rod. Anybody can throw that thing. But any A-rig, you want to be focused on an A-rig. Bass in spring, the ones that are still pre-spawn, they're feeding hard. The warmer that water gets, they're feeding more and more and more. And a lot of them are chasing shad and bait fish in the shallows or areas that stage going into the shallows. And an A-rig does a remarkable job of imitating a small school of bait fish. This time of year, unless your water is crystal clear, I would also focus on an A-rig that's got blades on it. That added flash is such a big, big deal. It just has more drawing power. It will pull fish farther. I'll always start with bladed before I go non-bladed. Next one up is an underspin. The underspin, I mean, we could be talking a little guy, we could be talking a big one, weedless, exposed hook. These are two of ours. That's our mini underspin. That's got a 2.75 swammer on it, just a little tiny profile. This is our full size with that 3.5-inch guy on there, that Largo shad. But you can fish an exposed hook or a weedless, like an owner flashy swimmer type hook. Either one, if you got a lot of grass, a lot of junk, a lot of laydowns, that flashy swimmer is the deal because you can crawl it through everything. It'll just bang its way through, but you still get that flash. If you're open water, around the edges of docks, down rocky shorelines, things like that, that exposed hook has an amazing hookup ratio. Both are great. But the important thing, again, is that blade. Bass are going to eat small swim baits all through the spring. Flat out, they just are. But when they are actively chasing bait fish, which they do a lot this time of year, adding that flash is what makes you stand out from the thousands of other bait fish. That is such a critical deal. I've had so many times where we're throwing small swim baits and we're catching them, we're doing fine, but somebody goes to that underspin and it just takes it to the next level. You start catching more, you start catching bigger. It's really remarkable how well that works. That's why we took the time to design our underspin. We wanted smaller profile underspins with heavy wire hooks so that we didn't have to throw giant profiles, but we could still stick big ones and get them in the boat. That's why we put so much time into that. Next one is going to be, we could go a lot of different ways right here. Probably the square bill. The square bill is one of my personal favorite ways to fish. I would throw a square bill every day if I could. It's just plain fun. Now, I don't just throw that square bill and wind it back to the boat. This is a time of year where you want to be erratic. Just like we're putting a blade on our swim bait or a blade on our A-rig to catch the fish's attention and draw them in, get you to stand out from the crowd. I don't want my crankbait on a steady retrieve through the water. We're burning and pausing. Burn, 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 pause. Burn, burn, pause. Burn, 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 pause. Run that thing, kill it. Run it, kill it. Those fish will charge after that thing, and when it stops, that's when they smash it. So that erratic retrieve is critical. Two baits for you. The Bill Lewis ATV, which comes as no surprise to anyone who's ever watched Tactical Bassin. We love this bait. It is so incredibly weedless. It comes through cover so well. I caught a pile of fish on it today. It's just one of those baits that is tied on at least one of my rods, if not more than one, every single day in the spring. Now, a second bait for you, because we are going into April. These fish are moving shallower and shallower and shallower. They're getting up there around cover. That's where this little guy comes in from Damiki. This is the BTC 50. And this is a really, really cool little bait. Subtle little knock in there, but a very quiet bait overall. And it runs dirt shallow. You're talking 0 to 12 to 18 inches of water. Where I fish, we have a lot of fish that'll push up on flats or into the backs of coves. They'll go farther in there than a boat can even go. In that situation, a guy standing on shore bank fishing actually has way more advantage because the boats can't even reach a lot of the fish on my lake. In those situations, I want to push that boat as far as I can, and then I take a bait like that and launch it all the way back there. And a lot of people overlook the value of having a handful of square bills in the boat, because most people have a favorite bait or two favorite baits and they just throw one or the other. That's all they do. You will never understand how critical options are until you start getting really, really shallow. Where this bait is awesome, if that water's 6 inches too shallow and it's a grassy bottom or it's a mucky bottom that's got last fall's leaves laying on it, this becomes impossible to fish because every time you start to speed up, it's down there digging leaves and it catches in the debris and you come back all mucked up over and over. So I can leave this 1.5, go down to the 1.0, and suddenly I can fish that same spot. Well, I get even shallower, that 1.0 won't work. I switch over to that BTC 50, I can fish that same spot. Those little changes of how deep that bait is running are everything, because you can take the wrong bait and you just have to baby it through there, kind of walk it through the snags. Whereas a bait that will run truly shallow, you can plow through that stuff full speed, burning, pausing, and just never hit anything except the fish. All right, we've got a couple more for you. Next one's going to be the lipless. The lipless should be on the deck every single day in spring, just like a square bill, just like an A-rig, an underspin. These are just key baits that you want to have with you. No surprise with either of these. The Jackall TN70, then that Nomad, that Swimtrex Max. These are both baits that we have just been blasting them with lately. You can straight retrieve these baits. You can bottom hop them. You can burn them and stall them. So like burn it and then give it a little pull, slack it, burn it, slack it, bottom hopping. And then of course, just straight cover in water, just trying to find fish. Both of those baits can do all of that stuff super effectively. Actually, one more though, just because, if I can get my rod out of here, just because I've been catching fish on this thing today, this little guy from Duo, that is a subtle, look at my bent out hook. I mean, I have been catching them. That subtle little bait gets them. It's got, just like these others, super fast startup speed, super tight wobble. Not a bait that I'm fan casting with, it's a bait that I'm bottom hopping with. But those baits with that instant startup where you just barely pull and they flutter, those are killer baits. And I've had a really fun day on that one. So just going to include it because of the damage we've been doing. All right. We should end it there, but I can't. And I don't even know which one of these, if I was going to cut one out, I could cut out. So I'm just going to talk about them together. And in the video description, I'll give you a couple of my favorites for each, okay? And that is a spinnerbait and a chatterbait. Two of the all-time springtime baits. I don't care what trend comes along in the industry. I don't care what's happening in the spring. Bass can be caught on those guys right there. The chatterbait slightly outshines the spinnerbait now just because it has more momentum. It's newer, more people throw them, and that's just taken a little bit away from the spinnerbait. But if anything, that's made the spinnerbait bite better. And that's why I can't decide between them. But again, baits that can be fished super shallow. Both of these are shockingly weedless. You may not have ever even realized the application where you can take a chatterbait and throw it back in junk like shore grass and run it through that stuff. And most of the time it will come through. And the spinnerbait even more so. If you've got a spinnerbait, if you take that trailer hook off and it's just a bare spinnerbait, that thing is so weedless. You can throw it through reeds, you can throw it through wood, you can throw it through grass. It's crazy. The actual blade arm on a spinnerbait is a weed guard to that hook, and it will come through everything. Same deal with both the chatterbait and the spinnerbait. Forget that straight retrieve. Don't do that this month. Break that cadence up. Work that bait. Pop that rod tip. Be erratic. You're trying to draw fish. You're trying to get their attention. There's a lot of bluegill in the shallows. Baby crappie, shad, all sorts of different things up there. Plenty of opportunity for bass to eat. You need to draw their attention away from all of that and get them to eat your spinnerbait, chatterbait, A-rig, whatever it might be. So again, focused on baits that have blades, baits that are loud, a lot of ruckus, things that will draw those fish's attention. And then if you do want to slow down, that shaky head will always get you bit, but switching over to that jig might just get you that even bigger bite, that fish of a lifetime, that one you spent all winter dreaming about. Guys, I'll link all this in the video description. We flew through it, so in the order that we talked about it, I'll organize that description so they're all easy to find for you. And again, I'll give you specific bait, favorite color, favorite size, favorite trailer if it has one. Be really specific with Tim and I's best confidence baits, just so that you have a starting point. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.